false positives. I talk about this a lot with my clients. You probably do too. When we're, what do we mean by false positives? And how we can alleviate those initial decisions on something we think we know what the problem is, and we execute it and we realize we're wrong. And what do we do about that? And how do they get involved in it?
All right. So jumping right in with the false positive concept. Well, we have to contextualize that a little bit. Yeah, right. And define some terms. What are we really talking about? And I introduced this concept in the Muscle System Specialist course in section 15, right? To, bring to light this idea that, when we are trying to make an observation or detect something about a system or some natural phenomenon, or unnatural phenomena for that matter, are we detecting, are we observing, what we wanted to try to observe or detect or not, right? And this is a real big deal in, many sciences, especially in medical diagnosis, right? Did we see cancer or not? Did we detect the flu or not? Did you have COVID or not, right? I mean, it's a big discussion now with COVID testing, right? And the false positives and false negatives associated with that. And this idea has been around for a while statistically, but generally speaking, when we talk about, defining these things, when we go to try to detect the presence of something or the absence of something, we talk about it as a true positive when we detect what we wanted to detect. A true negative is we didn't detect what we didn't want to detect. And a false positive is we detected something we thought was what we wanted, but it really wasn't. And then a false negative is a miss. You didn't get either of those outcomes, right? Or any of those, you just missed it. And so given those ideas, right, and typically this is a highly quantified process as much as anything else. And in the course, I talk about, receiver operating characteristics and, the development of radar technology, right? And, when I was on a nuclear submarine, we had sonar technology as well. Can we detect things in our liquid environment? And can we detect them accurately, right? So that we know that what we're looking at on the sonar screen is a enemy submarine, or it's just a big old whale, right? What's the difference, right? Or a giant school of fish, right? How do we do this? And this is not an easy thing to do, actually, to create a measuring and observational process that leads us to, some mathematical, statistical conclusion about, yes, we have high certainty, maybe not absolute certainty, that what we're observing or detecting is what we want to detect. And so this whole process involves metrology, the science of measurement. It's one thing to say, okay, we've developed this sonar system, we send sound waves out into the liquid environment in 3 dimensions or in 2 dimensions or however we do it, and sound bounces back, and there's all kinds of science associated with measuring the time it takes for a signal to propagate through water and bounce off something and come back. And that's how we know how far away it might be within a certain fraction of a meter or millimeter, or however precise you want to be. And the more precise you want to be, the harder it is. That's for sure.
But whoa, hang on. I got to cut. You said the more precise you want to be, the harder it is. Why is that?
That's right. Well, because your measurements and the scale of your measurements, as you try to get smaller and smaller and more precise, have to be more and more accurate, right? More and more reliable. So validity, accuracy, reliability, all these concepts converge on this. And so you know, what's ultimately the reason for all of this is what's the consequence of a miss or an error? Like, what's the consequence if we missed it, or we thought we got it and it really wasn't, but we're going to act as though we did find it, and we're going to do a whole bunch of stuff now, right? And what's the consequence of being wrong about that? Error, right? Margins of error, and what's an error cost. And so that's, you know, the reason for why humans are trying to figure this stuff out, because, you know, if you're in charge of a missile system and you're, you know, monitoring through radar stuff in your airspace, and you think it's an enemy jet aircraft that's coming to bomb you, and you go ahead and shoot it down, it turns out to be a commercial jet with 200 civilians on it, and you just killed all of them, right? And that would be a pretty big error. And so you need to do whatever you can to try to make that radar system as precise as possible in detecting what you want to detect. That's why most aircraft have one on board to identify them. They've got a signal machine that's sending out a particular frequency that has an identifier number. So someone looking at a radar can say, oh, that's this number, that's this kind of aircraft. Okay, I know what that is now, right? To make that as precise as possible. So that is the reasons we set up these systems. And in what we do, you know, what are we trying, you know, to detect? Well, you know, we're trying to detect differences in motion for mirror image joints, left to right. And in the trunk, just the direction of the trunk and spine and the ribs, left to right, and it's a little more difficult through the sagittal, right, front to back. It's hard to see differences there, right? For same structures that are moving through the same plane, and in the extremities is that I can move this and have nothing to do with this one, right? So those are kind of independent in that sense. But in the trunk and spine, they're dependent. Both sides are acting at the same time, so a little different there. So got to be careful about that. But so that's one thing, and the question there is, can we see the displacement and estimate it? And then the other one is, you know, we're trying to detect a qualitative thing. In our case, the qualitative capabilities of the client system and our system to generate torque, muscle tension in some period of time. And we're calling this qualitative because we're not really directly taking a numerical measurement and attaching units to it. So there can be error here. The question is, you know, how do we figure out whether we found a control problem, the way we would define that, or not? And there is error there for sure. So what's the consequence of an error? It's not very big in our world. We're not going to cut somebody's arm off. We're not taking an organ out. So if we mess up, we can't, you know, say, oh, sorry, I took out your organ, I cut your arm off, and it was the wrong arm. So we're going to put that back on. That would be a big problem. And that's happened in hospitals, right, before. Horrifying.
Sure.
Horrifying.
In fact, it's interesting you talking about the consequences of the error. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, if we do something wrong, we could potentially hurt somebody. But then, like you said, you go to another extreme, like, well, we're not cutting someone's arm off, you know, we're not breaking bones. I'm like, okay, you made me feel a little bit better about myself now, not thinking on those realms, because there are other professionals out there that you and I would, you know, probably know. They have a higher, would you say a higher risk, or just like a different level of those consequences for errors compared to what we do?
I mean, risk is the right word. I mean, that's error and risk can be used in the same sentence to describe, what's the risk if we make a miss? What's the risk? What's the consequence? And the risk is we tear something, we crack something, we blow a ligament, we tear a labrum, right? And so, you got to understand forces and something about the system before you do that, right? And so, yeah, this is very difficult. It's really about this notion of certainty and uncertainty, right? We know nothing to we know everything, and coming to some sense of where we are on the certainty uncertainty scale. And we're trying to say we're more certain, and this can be done empirically. I mean, on a submarine, we could visualize the whale and go, yep, we went out on a boat, we threw some divers overboard, they swam down and they saw what we call a whale, and it's the distance from what the radar said from the submarine, and the signal on the submarine radar screen is such a configuration that we can say that's a whale, or what we would call a biologic, right? That's what it was called on a submarine. That's a biologic versus a non-biologic. And our radar specialists, not only were looking at a screen, but they also had an auditory listening device on, right? So there was a sound part with a visual part. So they were mixing quantitativeness with qualitativeness, right? That sounded like a biologic, because biologics elicited a certain sound when the sonar signal bounced off of them, and that was a different kind of sound than when a sonar signal bounced off a metallic hull, right? And so they would figure that out, right, and identify the object through these two means. And then we had libraries that we built up over time of different sounds, and they would compare sounds, and so we had a normative reference. So lots of things going on to corroborate whether or not we had a true positive, true negative. So not an easy task, and we had millions of dollars of equipment and thousands of hours of training for people to operate this stuff in order to detect these things. So
That's incredible. Now, how I like that you showed us this analogy in the course about the true positives and then the chart, the true negatives, false positives, false negatives, and helping us to gather the right information quantitatively as well as qualitatively, more on that end, when we're trying to either assess or check, what we call a biomotor configuration. I like to use the term positions with clients so they know we're going to check this position. I'm going to push you here, or you're going to push into me in this direction. I want to see if you're going to meet me or if I can push you back and see how you respond. How would we try to translate what we're doing with our clients or patients with these false positives? Because I know back before I took your course and a couple other courses, I was very fixed on I only can look at the data from the table. That's it. Flat, supine, prone, maybe seated, but that was it. And and trying to translate over, it's more than that. How do we try to really verbalize a different way of seeing something that can clarify what we were looking at initially is either wrong or right. Like you said, we have the sonar, we have the sound, we have it visually, but what if it wasn't a whale that's this distance and this distance?
Yeah, so corroboration is the key concept, right? Because we don't have very intensive, precise, expensive measuring equipment that's sending out signals or recording foot pounds or accelerations, which you could do. It just costs a lot of money and takes a lot of time to set those things up. And again, is it necessary for what we're doing, right? I mean, what's interesting to me when we look at measurement and reference systems about the state of a particular system, we certainly have lived with on our dashboards of our cars with a gas tank reference that said E, F, and some dashes in between.
Mhm.
There was no quantification there. I wasn't getting information, about how much actual liquid was in my gas tank. I just was watching this needle go between E and F, and there were some dashes, right? And then from there, I would kind of make an inference. Oh, it's on the F, so the tank must be filled with the gasoline, and it's about halfway between the E and the F, and so it must be about halfway filled. I had no idea how many gallons that was. It wasn't giving me a quantified number. In fact, I don't even think cars now give you an actual volume number of the gasoline. They might now say you have an estimated 26 miles left in your tank, right? Which is just a algorithmic guess based on the volume and the amount of gas the car is using, but that can vary depending on whether you're speeding or not, or accelerating quickly or going downhill, right? So there's lots of areas. That's just an estimation. And do I need to know precisely, as the operator of my car, exactly how many gallons is in it at moment to moment? Do I need to know there's 16.4278 gallons of gasoline in my car right now? And why would that be useful to me, right? In that situation? Well, it wouldn't be. It's unnecessary detail. And, the measuring instrument that would have to give me that level of precision would be probably excessively expensive to even put in the gas tank, right? And make the car cost $5,000 more when I don't need it to do that, right? So that's why all of this stuff is contextualized to what is its usefulness, its utility for what I'm trying to do here. Mm-hmm. I just need to know, man, if it's getting closer to the E, I better go to the gas station, right? And
Sorry, I'm laughing. It's great. It's true. I mean, I always thought E was enough, at least growing up when I didn't
hear anybody complaining, right? Like, I need to know exactly how much gas.
Yeah, exactly. My dad would always get in my car. Hey, you need gas. You're on E. Yeah, Dad, an E's enough. When it goes under enough, I know we need to go.
Right. That's right. Now, could you empirically, just drive your car until it stopped moving, and then you could look at the needle and go, oh, when it's 6 millimeters below the E line, I'm out of gas, right? Okay, I guess you could probably do that, right? And so, how precise do we really have to be for what we're trying to do? And what's the expense in time, energy, and resources in order to get more and more and more precision? Mm-hmm. That's the balancing act, right? And this is what the medical profession is doing all the time, right? You go see the doctor, they don't immediately order a $5,000 MRI. They do a set of what? Physical evaluations and tactile and visual observations, and maybe they take a blood pressure or something, or look in your ear with a magnifying glass or something, put a thermometer in your mouth, and they get a quick number. Then they make a decision. Do I need to spend more time and money getting more accurate information before I make a decision or not? That's what all this is about, is decision making, risk mitigation.
Mm-hmm. It's funny you mentioned the doctors. It's a little story that popped in my head, but when I was a kid, my dad, had a typical cold, and I went with him to go see the primary care doctor. And I watched very carefully. The nurse came in, took his blood pressure, didn't listen to his lungs, took a pulse rate. The doc came in and listened to his lungs, I think, and maybe two other forms of his version of an assessment. Nothing too crazy. No machine. Yeah, no, didn't do that.
Didn't
do that. Didn't do that one at all. No, just like very, very, very simple. Blood pressure, pulse rate. I maybe listened to his lungs, and I can't remember what the one other thing. He was gone for 10 minutes, and he comes back in with a diagnosis. And I was like, man, you knew? And I was a kid, so I was like baffled, like, wow, that's all you needed to do in order to know this is wrong with my dad right now. Here's a script and go. I'm not saying anything wrong there. It's just an observation as a child of what I thought was just amazing at him and the doctor and his whatever medical assistant did, and then coming back with a diagnosis. Oh,
which could have been wrong, right? And again,
yeah, you know,
they've shown that, right? They've done the research where, they go, okay, now let's take more expensive, more time consuming measurements of the system that you just said had this, that you detected this, and let's see if it's actually there.
mhm.
And they can, this is the difficulty of metrology and determining statistical false positive, false negative, and the receiver operating noise, right? And which is the source of false positives. And so you need at some point an absolute certain observation that you're comparing everything against. Well, how do you obtain that?
I was just gonna say, let's stick to that. You said a really scary word. You said absolute. Like
Absolute.
this is the final, like right here, boom. And if it's not this, there's nothing else that
That's
you'll be
right.
able to figure it out.
This is perfection. This is the perfect thing. This is what it is, right? And that's why science is what always skeptical in the sense that conclusions are tentative until we come up with better, more accurate, precise measurements and observations about something. So based on what we have now, we're concluding this, and this is useful for us, and we're going to make a decision based on this and go forward. So, okay, that's good. And the less information you have, probably the more uncertainty and risk there is that you're going to miss it or there's going to be a false positive. That's the whole idea of the receiver operating graphs and overlapping noise and actual detection and the overlap there and deciding, okay, there's a lot of overlap and so there can be a lot of misses here, right? Or a lot of false positives, because the greater the wider the net and the more precise and the more information you want to gather, the higher risk of getting things you don't want.
Oh, whoa. Let's tap into that a little bit. The more risk of things you don't want. Like,
That's
give
right.
me an example. Like,
Sure. You ever seen these deep sea trawlers? They just throw this giant net and drag it across the bottom of the ocean.
yeah,
And
like the shrimp boats.
yeah. What do they
Okay,
want to catch? Shrimp.
shrimp. That's
They
it.
want to detect shrimp, right? And these
Mhm.
shrimp boat captains are driving around the ocean and they're like, well, we know that shrimp kind of this time of year, they tend to come over, which, experience and knowledge accumulated over time. This is where they tend to go, and they tend to be off of these shoals or on this sandbar or at this depth, and the water temperature's like this, right? And they just go, all right, we want to catch shrimp. And they throw this net over and they just drag it through the water for a mile or two, and then they reel it in and they want to see what they caught, right? And hopefully they got 100% shrimp. No, the bigger the net, the more they caught a shark and a sea turtle, a bunch of seaweed, right? And a bunch of little fish they can't eat,
A bunch of
right?
junk.
A bunch of tin cans and license plates are in there, right? So, that's what's going to happen. And so then the crew's got to sort through all that stuff and spend a lot of what? Extra time getting rid of the noise, the
Mm.
stuff they didn't want. And so that's the real big challenge for people who are creating engineers and scientists creating measuring devices, detecting devices to try to figure out what's that balancing point between getting enough information so our certainty level's high, but not so much that we've got so much noise involved now that we're getting a lot of false positives.
Now, when we're going into our realm as muscle system specialists, first thing that popped in my mind about false positives were range of motion, you know, and I remember taking the course and playing around with, range of motion. That was it. That's all you needed. What's so funny?
Single variable, right? Yeah, one variable
Single variable,
in a
right?
complicated system, right? Yeah.
Single variable and a complicated, but it was all I knew, all I looked at, and but What is it about that alone that can't help you decide
Well,
what to do to help people?
yeah, it's the problem of the radar detector saying there's something entering our airspace. Shoot it down, right? We need anything entering the airspace, kill it.
Hmm.
Oh, wait a second. That was one of our supply planes bringing in some food for us, and you shot it down. Why'd you do that? Well, I don't know. I didn't discriminate. Single variable blip on the screen enters our airspace. Decision is kill it because if it's an enemy, they're going to hurt us, right? So that's the problem with single variable um, measurement and observation, unless that observation is very, very precisely determined, right? Which is
Well, and to go even further, I'll play a little bit more of a devil's advocate. Is you choose range of motion on one single joint.
yeah, right, yeah, right, yeah, and you're like, that's it. Now we know, right? And so, what do you know? So you did a single joint. You do a range of motion. You don't even compare it to the other side, right? What are you comparing it to? Why does it matter, right? And so this is part of the reason why I emphasize the use of qualitative information and in the living systems, understanding the subjective system is a single variable doesn't tell you much, even if it has a number attached to it. So if I look at your right hip while you're lying on your back and I move it from wherever it is to, and call that 0, which is arbitrary, by the way. Most measurement systems references have some relative arbitrariness to them. And then we say, okay, I'm going to move it out through the frontal plane on this axis as far as it'll go, based on what? How far you can move it or how far I can move it, right? We got to decide the conditions under which we're going to make the observation. And then I say, oh, from the relative starting position of 0, you moved 48.62 degrees into hip abduction. Okay. So we quantified it.
Yeah, we did.
Oh boy, got some units. We got some units. Now what? These things are meaningless without context. Numbers are meaningless without context. And so that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to build context as much as we can to understand how to interpret that signal, that piece of information.
So if we're building context on what we're trying to achieve for this person or people, why is it a problem to take the time to try to build that context?
Well, I don't think it is a problem. I think you have to.
Well, no, I agree. But I
that's
guess what I'm asking is how come for every, gosh, I hate saying everybody else out there,
yeah.
but how can I ask this? Why is it a problem to not take the time to build the context that's important for the individual in front of you?
Wow. I mean, it's the
I
cost of
know.
the cost of an error goes up pretty big because your measuring and detecting devices are already not very precise. And so you're working right off the bat with limited information that isn't very precise. And that requires you to make a lot of assumptions to fill in any gaps of knowledge or information to try to come up with a conclusion. And so and whether or not you could even develop any real meaning from that observation is the point, right? What does it mean against what this system does and wants to do and where it is and where it wants to go? And so it's a much more dynamical process than just because I've heard the same thing, right? Those guys do too
What's
much
that?
unnecessary stuff.
Oh, yeah.
All this interviewing and all this looking at punch. Just do these three things real quick, and you're going to be good to go, right?
Okay, well, let's stay here then because this is where I really wanted to go with this conversation. Because there's the time variable, right? We want that quick, I don't know. We want it to be an Amazon package.
we
right?
want it to be quick. So we don't like delayed, gratification. We want there to be more certainty than there is, because that makes us feel good and comfortable. People don't like it when their uncertainty level is high. A lot of anxiety associated with that. Makes us feel important when we can say we know something in a very quick period of time. So there's lots of psycho-emotional dynamics going on there. That's for sure. And we're trying to appease, a society at this point, a culture at this point, which wants a quick fix.
But let's go back to the certainty part. If they want more of that certainty, where does that certainty come in play where it's, oh, you got it in a few minutes?
They'd have to explain what they're trying to get. What is it that they think they got? So this is part of the whole null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis idea in this process, right? As we're creating a conclusion, right? Kind of a statement about what we think. And if I can come up with any number of alternative hypotheses against your hypothesis based on the very limited information you have, you're in a pretty weak position, right?
Now, how can someone be aware of that?
They have to be aware of these ideas, these concepts.
Exactly.
Yes.
But if they aren't, right, and they come to you or myself and we're trying to build that context, but then they already have, like you just said, they have information from somewhere else. Here, I've got this.
Yeah,
Just take that.
I have knee arthritis, right? What are you going to do? That's why I have pain, because I have knee arthritis, right? So we like to draw direct cause and effect relationships, because, again, it creates certainty, right?
Okay.
And so we want to be certain. And so when someone says with authority, maybe bestowed by license or academic credential, someone says, oh, your knee hurts because you have arthritis.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. You're good.
That's it. It's been determined, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what's shocking for clients when we improve their motor control and output qualitatively, and how quickly they can generate torque in a variety of places in their body and control themselves. And now they don't have knee pain. And now they're in a quandary, because they're like, well, does that mean my arthritis is gone? No.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a mistake in the assumption that arthritis always equals pain. That's the hypothesis.
Well, now they have their why.
People love that.
They have their why. They've determined it. And then I like to play the why, what if, and how. Because if they have their why and they're being fed to go do the how to fix, or get rid of it, or I like to use the word problem solve like you. I think it's great. But if their how doesn't match their why, how are they going to make those changes and be more aware of there's something else going on in their system?
Yeah, well, this is, again, back to why we explore the system and recognize its complexity, and have philosophical frameworks to explain why the system the way it is, right? And try to work off of those things. So decision making is a confluence of a variety of sources of input to come up with a reasoned, rational conclusion, and then come up with the null hypothesis, and then go ahead and run the test and see what happens. The problem is we run the test with bias, and we want it to do what we want, versus running it with the idea of, again, nullifying it, falsification. Let's maybe prove this wrong right now. Let me see what happens.
Even if our hypothesis leads us to, well, you come in for knee pain and I see something going on with your right shoulder, and I want to test that.
Yeah. And so this is why we spend all this time, again, contextualizing for our client our philosophical process, and why we think about the system the way we do, and how we think about what pain is, right? Because, again, folks think about pain as what? A specific, tangible empirical thing that's in their body. And it's not. It's not necessarily that. It's an informational conclusion.
An informational conclusion. Sorry, I had to repeat that. Like, I usually ask, hey, what does it look like? You know, what color is it? I start asking, it's arbitrary to ask those types of questions. And it's like, yeah, it's not something that, if you took an MRI, where would it be pointed out? Like, where is the pain? Not the arthritis part, like the pain.
Yeah, where's it? Where do you point it to your body, right?
Like it's
right
like
here. It's
mhm.
over here, right? It's in my elbow. Oh, okay.
Like it's an objective piece of matter.
Yeah, like it's there in the pain is in my elbow.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. The pain isn't in your elbow, right? The pain is in your central nervous system's conclusion about the information it has available and the data. Information is just data with meaning, right? The meaning it creates from that based on a variety of things. So sensory information, memory, anxiety about sensations or lack of anxiety about sensations, right? And pain is a word, right? That's what Patrick Swayze was trying to say in that movie where he was the body, the bouncer, a roadhouse, and
Mm-hmm.
he gets stabbed or he gets cut, right? He goes to the hospital and the doctor says, do you want some anesthesia for this? And before she stapled it up and he says no, and she looks at him like, that's going to be painful. And he says, well, pain don't hurt. Well, what's he trying to say? Pain don't hurt, right? He's trying to say, I'm in control of the way I perceive my sensory experience, and I don't need something like anesthesia to dull that. I can manipulate that information myself, right? Okay, and that happens a lot, right? People do that, and you see those people sticking stuff through their skin and through their hands, and this is what confuses researchers about pain, is someone who is doing something that looks like it should be painful, like hanging from meat hooks from the ceiling through their skin, and they're getting pleasure from it. Right.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
So it's kind of like, well, why would someone do that? Right. Well, how is that possible? Right. Is there something wrong with their nervous system or their chemistry, or is it the way they think about the whole sensory experience? Right. And yes, all of that is convergent. So this is the interesting dilemma about dealing with pain. And again, this is why you always hear me say all these weird things like sensations we don't like, and then we attach more specific words, adjectives, or verbs to the sensation that give it a quality or elevate its meaning or its problem, right? So I can say, "Oh man, that's sore." Keep using it.
Mm-hmm.
I could say, "Oh, that's pain." Stop using it. Right. And so all I did was I used the word to say it's a sensation I really don't like. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Versus soreness, which is a sensation I kind of don't like. Mm-hmm. Versus tightness, which is another sensation that I don't mind, but it's kind of unusual and I wish I didn't have it. Right. And so we use words to provide a degree of scale to our interpretation in the context of the sensation for us. But emotional pain, is that the same as physical pain? Still the word pain. Now we've got another word in front of it, to contextualize it. Mm-hmm. Physical pain, emotional pain, right? So again, pain is just a word used to describe a sensation you don't like a lot.
So everyone has their own internal radar of pain, right? Their own
interpretation. Yeah, how I'm going to interpret this.
Is this a whale here, and how do we see it, internally?
That's it, man. So it's just a very interesting. This is that biopsychosocial model of pain, attempting to try to, figure out, well, what are all the things that can influence, this conclusion of the system that uses language to describe what it's experiencing, right? Because if someone couldn't speak to tell us they were in pain, how would we know they were?
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that'd be difficult.
Right.
Wow. That's there's this show on Apple TV called See, where everyone's blind.
Yeah, I love that show. I
Yeah,
saw it.
it's a great show. How how I'm sure with you in your mind, I was asking a bunch of questions. I'm like, well, how do they know about this? And how do they know if someone's in pain? And how do they know what flowers to grab?
They didn't
No,
for a long time, right?
of course not.
A lot of it was trial and error, right? I mean,
Hmm.
who decided, that I was going to eat this mushroom thing growing on the ground, and that someone watched him eat it and they died. And they said, "Wow, we probably don't want to eat that again," right? Big,
Yeah.
big consequence to an error, right? Like, ooh, that
Yeah.
was a big error. You shouldn't have eaten that, but we didn't know. Somebody has
Oops.
to, somebody has to do it first, right?
All right,
So,
Bob, you're next. Yeah, try
yeah,
this one. You know.
or they might watch animals, right? And they go, "Oh, the animals are eating that. I wonder if I
Mm.
can eat that." And some animals can eat things that we can't eat, right?
Oh,
So
great.
we still don't know, but most of the time we can eat stuff animals eat. But
Mhm.
I'm not going to watch some kind of crazy bird eating some dead animal in the middle of the road and think I can eat that too, right? So it's tough, right? Unless I'm starving to death, and I'm
Yeah.
willing to die. So there's, again, context is really the
Yeah.
key. Corroborating and contextualizing is the important thing. And so, again, this is what's so interesting to me about dealing with pain and human sensation is I can't know anyone else's pain. I
Yes.
can't, I cannot know their sensation. There's no way for me to detect it, to look at it, to examine it, to measure it. No way.
Do you ever get people that expect you to know it while you're working with them?
I mean, some people will say, "Oh man, that hurts. You have pain like me?" And I'm like, I have sensations I call pain. I don't know if they're like yours. I have to
Hmm.
tell them, I don't know if it's like yours. I can't. You're the epistemic authority. You're the knowledge expert on your system's sensory processes. No one else can be.
Yeah.
Only you.
Well, what I mean was, and that's a great example. I guess what I meant to like, for instance, I'll have someone I'm working with either out on the floor doing an exercise or on the table doing an exercise, and I see, I observe and see something that didn't look right. That wasn't, I was trying to detect something and I wasn't sure I was trying to detect something that I wanted to detect, but it wasn't what I detected. If, from our standpoint, I know that sounds confusing
Yeah.
for anybody else watching this or listening to this, but then when I ask the client said, "Hey, how'd that feel to you?" Well, I don't know. I mean, you're the expert. No, 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 no. Like and like you just said, I will never be able to know your subjective internal sense of how you feel, whether it felt good, felt not good, okay. I really didn't like that. Oh, that felt really, really good.
This is why we have to communicate to our clients, right? That what you're experiencing is very important to me and I need the report. Even though it might be difficult for me to interpret what you're saying, I still need you to hear it and try to explain it to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like just this morning, I was working with a physician up from out of town, and brings his son in periodically. And he was talking. I took him through a phase 2, right? Just doing some motions, and he tells me how he's feeling while he's doing the motions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, he does, this motion, and he goes, "Ooh, yeah, there's some kind of pinch or something in there." And then he uses the term AC joint. So he just puts a name on it, right? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it must be
We
that.
have a location. We have a
Yeah,
location for the
it's
pain. So there
it's
we go.
around that area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. So I make a note, right? The motion was symmetrical, right? That's fine.
Okay.
As far as mirror image comparison, okay. But he's just like, yeah, I have an old shoulder injury there. I don't know. So okay, fine. So we go out And I'm like, well, I need to pick some kind of a torque profile for his shoulder to see whether or not something shows up there and how he feels using his shoulder muscle a different way. So I say, here, sit down in this chair, and here's a dumbbell. I just want you to raise it out to the side like this. And he goes, okay, about this high. I go, that's high enough. If you feel good there. Yeah, okay. Do it on the other side. He goes, oh, this feels way more natural. This doesn't feel natural at all. This doesn't feel right to me. Even though if we compared the motions, they would look almost perfectly symmetrical, mirror image. But his report was, this does not feel natural. What does that mean, right? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to feel natural? Right? And so you got to ask some questions like,
sure,
does it feel easy?
Yeah.
He just is like, yes, it feels easy. I don't feel anything limiting me, and it feels like it should feel, right? So each of us has a built-in what? Normative reference for how our bodies feel, right? So, and this is important from a memory perspective, because you wouldn't be able to know if you didn't have a reference about how something has felt and whether it's changed or not, right? Mm-hmm. So in order for you to even detect change, you had to know what existed prior, or you would not know there was a change. And so he had a sense, a memory of, my shoulder used to feel natural. Now it doesn't. This one feels natural, easy, no limitation.
Since they both, since they both, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Feels like it should, right? That
feels like it should. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, all right. This is a guy who's 50 years old. He's been using his body, jiu-jitsu. And so I'm like, all right. So then we do a whole bunch of reps, and time and count how many reps. And he does about the same number, but it just didn't good. And so now I'm like, all right, well, let's go around. Maybe that's a lead. Let me go corroborate whether or not there's anything from a motor output perspective in our different configurations. And the kind of the reaction thing we're doing with the QMAMC, right? Which is, how quickly can you establish equilibrium and keep it in a perturbation, right? And we found some things, right, that he couldn't control very well, even if he wanted to, right? That's the thing we're looking at qualitatively, his sensation of it, and whether or not, even when he wants to try to maintain a position, he cannot. Oh, that's interesting.
So that's probably one of the biggest keys that we're trying to find, right?
That's error, right? Mm-hmm. I want to be able to do that, and I should. And even when I want to, when you do that, I still can't. Error. So he's picking up, there's an error there, right? And I'm picking it up because I'm watching a displacement and I'm feeling my own displacement, right? So my visual and auditory and tactile system is involved in making an assessment about this. And we're expecting what? To our reaction to our perturbation. And the shortest possible period of time, there's the least amount of possible displacement for a given torque. Okay. Could we measure all that? We could. That could be measured. We could put accelerometers on them, right? We could do super slow-mo, video footage, right? We could have, foot-pounds of pressure somewhere on it and estimate the torque. We could do all that. It just takes too long. It's not necessary for what we're doing.
And since, you're saying it's not necessary that we can use all that due to our observation and the methods that you teach us, why is this a missing link? Why is this not, I don't want to say why, no one else is doing this out there. That's not really my question. It's more like, how is it that we're still trying to build the context of what we're doing with our clients that differentiates us from all the other methods and means that are building their context?
It's probably our philosophical basis.
Okay.
Our body view.
Ooh, yeah, body view. That's right. Big. Yep.
So that's a big one. And then how we're interpreting the science, the literature, and what it says about how our system works. And engineering concepts, we're using engineering concepts like stability, right? To understand system control and function. And we're using a lot more data points.
Yes.
Converging on this, right?
Meaning that we're putting it together. We're taking all the information that we're gathering, because it's not just range of motion. We're using posture, standing,
supine. If it was just range of motion, one being less, you're going to look at the one that displaces less. You wouldn't even look at his shoulder.
That's true. I did that at one time.
Right. You would be like, there's no problem there because there's no displacement asymmetry. Well, that's not enough. There's other, again, we're recognizing a much broader and deeper level of system function, right? We're not just looking at displacement. We're looking at torque development. We're looking at fatigue resistance. We're looking at girth. We're looking at history. We're looking at sensation reporting. We're looking at, right, a lot of different things for us to converge on something and say, there's a lot of data points converging on this.
Yep.
What's going on over here? And then we sample.
And all that information hopefully will alleviate all those false positives.
Yes, that's the whole idea of corroboration is let's build. We're building a circumstantial case. There's no question about it.
Yeah, well said.
But there's a continuum: strong circumstantial, weak circumstantial, right? So we're trying to build a stronger circumstantial case, and a lot of people going to jail on circumstantial evidence, right? So it can be pretty strong. We don't have the smoking gun, but man, we got a lot of other data points here. Jesse Smollett gonna go do some jail time. But that was a circumstantial case, it was testimony. Nobody was there videotaping the whole thing from beginning to end, showing, that he faked it or anything. It was a circumstantial case, but it was very strong, right? So, but it was based on what? That's why we have trials. Lots of data. Cops coming in, evidence, physical evidence, witness testimony, camera angles, right? Interviews being done. Okay, let's put all this together and then kind of see where it lays. So we're building a strong evidentiary base, I would say, when we can, for us to make some, reasonably defensible conclusions about where to continue sampling and apply some of our methods, not assuming that they're going to work every time.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. It's unfortunate. Still have to accept the fact that we still don't know.
And that's the thing. This system is trying to teach you how to function in uncertainty.
Ooh, that was really good. Hold on, I got to think about that. Can you say that again?
The muscle system specialist system is a system that teaches the thinking, the cognitive skill of functioning in uncertainty.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Where you still can be rational and build a defensible thing, even though you don't have and will probably never have all of the information that you could have.
Now, is it possible that other means think the same way? I'm sure they know. Would they admit it? I know some that will.
Some.
Yeah.
Some. Yeah. But most are very rigid, right?
Well, of course.
Right.
They're going to be rigid towards their bias.
Yeah. You look at Yonda, right? Upper cross, lower cross syndrome. You see these relative structural orientations. We're going to categorize that as upper cross. And that means this is tight, this is weak, this is tight, this is weak. That means this must be stretched and this must be contracted, right? And so it initiates almost a protocol of how to deal with it.
And if that protocol has false positives,
probably has a lot. It's making a lot of assumptions, right?
Okay.
We're going to assume that you're protracted, even though scapulas can occupy a region on the thorax, posterior thorax. I just did something on scapular position. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I did. I just watched it the other day. It's fantastic.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, wait a second. These things could be anywhere in this general region. So just to say, oh, they're both protracted because they're farther away from the spine than they should be. Based on what?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And because of that, your rhomboids are weak, your mid-trap is weak, right? And your pecs are tight. And so we're going to stretch these and strengthen these. And then, now, okay, so you take somebody through, 3 weeks of stretching and strengthening, and it doesn't work the way you thought or didn't solve the problem. What was the error? Cost of the error was a lot of wasted time and money.
Yeah.
And that's the thing we're trying to minimize is, we charge, a good amount of money for what we do. And I don't want to waste their time or mine or waste their money, and so how can I, get to a reasonable potential solution quicker?
Yeah.
And not. And if I can't, well, then I got to start, rethinking what I'm doing. Okay. But I'm not assuming it's going to work. And that's the interesting thing is ultimately, for the kind of clients we're talking about, the client wants a totally qualitative, subjective conclusion. Something that can't be measured or quantified. That's what they want, right? So if that's the case, then we better be really subjective and really understand subjectivity.
Yeah, but don't you think that there's too much focus on that with the location part?
No, because all they can tell you is where it is, where they feel it, right? Now, local symptom must mean local problem, therefore must initiate local solution. That's the bias.
Yes. Okay. That's what I meant.
Yeah. That's the problem is people are like, my shoulder hurts. So everything must be done to the shoulder. Oh, okay. Well, go ahead and do everything you can to the shoulder. All right. What happened? Still hurts. Okay, now we got a problem, right? And we're looking around and we're like, we get an MRI, we go to the next level of precision, MRI, X-ray, all that, spend more money, spend more time. And now because of the shoulder, the local symptom, local problem must mean local solution bias. Anyone looking at the MRI or the X-ray is looking for what? Non-normative, structural, organic reason why there could be pain there. So now the radiologist is working from a bias, right? So they're reading the diagnosis going shoulder pain, anterior. Okay. MRI, shoulder. Well, there's low arthritis in that AC joint. Maybe a tear in that supraspinatus a little bit. Maybe there's some synovial fluid built up there. Yeah, that's the reason.
Yeah.
Okay, right. But see, these are the kind of cases we're going to get. The ones that have subjected to local symptom, local problem, local solution bias, and it's not working. Sometimes it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, yep, I do see that.
But sometimes it's not. Now what do? You better start looking around. You better get that out of your head, that whole local thing, right? You better get that out of your head. Or you better come up with some new ways of looking at the system and detecting things about the system that you weren't detecting before. And we're detecting through the QMAMC, right? The rapidity of their reaction by developing torque in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
As one of the indicators of control.
By the way, QMAMC, qualitative manual assessment of motor control. It's a lot to swallow there. It's not as cool as Shield.
No, not as
so
cool. Not as cool.
Not as cool as Shield. Right. We're trying, but that's it.
Yeah. because ultimately the measure of whether someone likes what we're doing is feels natural, feels good.
Yeah.
That's how they're concluding whether what we're doing is working. That's their ultimate measurement of it.
Mm-hmm.
Feels good now. Oh, that feels easy and free, Greg. There they use all these words. Oh man, that feels so much better. Why? I don't know. I don't have any sensations I don't like. It just feels easy to use my shoulder now. Okay.
And that qualitative manual assessment of motor control is what helps us determine or alleviate those false positives.
Correct.
Really, really helps out a lot.
Yeah. And that's a dynamical part because most of all those other processes are very static. Just looking. X-ray is just looking.
Mm-hmm.
MRI is just looking.